You are now listening to the Low Hanging Fruits podcast. Listener discretion is advised.
Chop, chop, chop.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Low Hanging Fruits. I'm Lauren.
I'm
What's the name of the
Constance.
podcast? I'm Bhang. What's up? I don't use real names.
I'm Elyssa.
And I'm Autism Cat, or Kelsey.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you very much, Bang on Autism Cat. We're all using our real names here, so nobody try to figure them out.
Yeah, obviously.
Today we've got a very special episode. It's not. I have not read this book, so this is going to be brought to you courtesy of some of our other members. But I'm so excited to hear everything that you've all been working on, and this is going to be another banger. I can tell.
Yeah.
Please.
It's gonna.
Yeah, it's. I wanted to start this off actually by going through a bunch of quotes from another one of Maupin's books.
Because the subject of this episode is going to be Caleb Maupin.
Yes. It's not on Goodreads. It's called Satan at the Fountainhead, which is, of course, a reference to Ayn Rand's book, The Fountainhead. And it's...
The subtitle is like the Israel lobbying the financial crisis.
Yeah, it's very anti-Semitic.
To say the least.
Let me go through a few quotes, and we can kind of react to them as we go. There's like one part where he goes into Ayn Rand and her connection to Alan Greenspan, the buddy, whatnot.
Former
he's
chairman
just
of
like,
the Federal Reserve.
Yeah, he says Ayn Rand, born Alicia Rosenbaum, the leader of this small cult of Zionist psychopaths. So, I mean, he already tries to make her sound especially more Jewish than she sounds by her Ayn Rand name. It's and there's also one part where there's a lot of one thing that comes back a lot in Maupin's thought is praise for Roosevelt, and I think one part of that is Roosevelt, his anti-Semitism, and he describes Roosevelt as no president since Roosevelt has been able to stand up to this powerful cabal of evil. He also talks here about the coming insurrection is one that will involve people across the entire planet joining forces against a common enemy, a satanic cartel of prophet worshippers who is threatening the very continued existence of humanity.
Yeah,
there's a lot of things that make you go, yeah, I don't think you need to say that unless you're gesturing towards some kind of anti-Semitic conspiracy theory.
Yeah, it also speaks more generally to this issue. There's a lot of there's an issue with a lot of political writing where it's very flowery in a way that is very 20th century. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I'm stylistically critiquing his abhorrent anti-Semitism, but I think it's important because
it's like the people who read too much Lenin or Bordiga, and then they're just even if they're not doing it consciously, they're just trying to be polemical, and they end up thinking they're part of a nascent revolutionary movement, and who a decade are going to be overthrowing the Tsar. No.
I think there's a lot of that going on, but I think usually you can kind of tell the difference between someone who's just trying to be trying to use polemics and trying to sound like a populist and and someone who's actually gesturing towards like a secret cabal that is ruling the world. Here,
And
let me
it's actually
read some other quotes.
okay. Yeah.
I think this is very interesting because, like here, he says, almost all of humanity is now rising with the same aspirations and fighting the same common enemy. And here, this one is a very interesting, one, and I think a very damning one. Here, the Israeli government, with its proxy forces in the United States and elsewhere, right? So he already turns the relationship on its head.
Yeah, when it's the other way around, it's
Israel
it's
in
textbook
like
anti-Semitism. It's like
yeah,
no one who's like serious about like U.S.-Israeli relations are going to say that like actually it's Israel that's like controlling the U.S. No, it's the other way around. The moment the U.S. would say okay, like you've like the U.S. is the one that can cut off Israel, not the other way around.
let me continue that one because it becomes even more damning, I think. With its proxy forces in the United States and elsewhere, is just one section of a wide cabal of criminal profiteers. Israel itself is an integral part of a global world order called imperialism by leftists and globalism by right-wing nationalists, in which bankers in London and the United States have absolute, unchecked political power. Israel is not simply an evil entity in itself. It is part of a wider global cabal. So right there, I think that's maybe the most damning quote in the book, because he essentially says when right nationalists talk about globalism, what they really mean is the same thing as what I mean by imperialism, right? So like
this is extremely funny
because he constantly complains about how he's compared to right wingers, but here he does it himself.
In his breadtube book, I can read a passage now that like you told me that I didn't know that quote because this is gonna make it way funnier. So we've been talking about the Satan at the Fountainhead book, which isn't on Goodreads, and we just got how we got to read it is someone who just took pictures of the physical book. It's not even like a proper like PDF scan. It's just like a series of images in a zip. And God bless whoever sent that to Elyssa, because that's like, well, to be honest, before Elyssa showed me that, I already knew he was like a rabid anti-Semite, and it was because of this passage I'm gonna read. All right, so
we should probably talk about what's at stake here, like why.
Yeah,
why he might be an anti-Semite, or like we should talk about like what the implications of that anti-Semitism really are.
I want to get to that, but wait, I'm gonna read from to just see. So this is from this BreadTube book to see that like nothing has really changed. All right, so quote. Furthermore, BreadTube voices tend to argue that anything resembling Lenin's analysis of imperialism in its imperialist stage is somehow anti-Semitic. BreadTubers will often claim that references to bankers, international bankers, or globalism is merely a coded repackaging of Nazi conspiracy theories about Jewish global domination. This allegation is absurd and would render not just all adherents of Marxism-Leninism, but also many liberal critics of globalization, such as Noam Chomsky, Arundhati Roy, and Naomi Klein, to be Nazi propagandists. And now, there's not a fucking paragraph break.
Is a Nazi propaganda.
There's not there's not even like a line break, and then he says this immediately. That is when I knew he was anti-Semite before Elyssa showed me the book. All right, so he continues. The world is not dominated by low-level businessmen who own individual factories, but by an elite of ultra-rich, globally oriented capitalists. These capitalists do not focus their business efforts on a single national market. The ruling class of Wall Street and London are globalists, and they dominate the world economy with gigantic financial institutions, international banks. Like,
yeah, it's yeah. There's also one thing I also wanted to briefly talk about is like, and when I mentioned this, you, Constance, I think you were a bit more familiar with him, but like Maupin has like a big connection to Lyndon LaRouche.
Yeah, Lyndon
Uh,
LaRouche.
there's like
American all-around cool man, Lyndon LaRouche.
yeah, there's like
A known crank. Kind of started out as like kind of started out as like a Trotskyist who like really
He was
liked
a Luxembourgist. He was one of the first like
Yeah,
people to call themselves a Luxembourgist. That was back in like the 70s, the 60s. He's old as shit. I think he's
Yeah.
dead.
yeah, and he's kind of like famous for being like an anti-Semite who kind of tries to play it into like the plausible deniability angle where he
Yeah,
like
he says like I think he
like
admitted at one point in an interview that like he talks about like the Queen of England, you know, running the world secretly and being lizard people, and he's like, no, I'm actually like this is all just code. I'm actually talking about the Jews here.
which is also what
yeah, and it's
the person who like originated the lizard people conspiracy admits to. What's his name? I don't remember. You know what I'm talking about?
David Icke?
Yeah, David Icke. Yeah, David Icke admits it. That it's about Jews. It's just like a
But-
allegorical.
but like to go a bit into his connection to LaRouche, like we know for a fact that he owns at least one book by LaRouche because it's seen on his shelf in his video "What is Atlanticism? What's behind the tension with Russia and China?" He also in one tweet, which is archived, but I think now probably deleted. He recommends, among others, a book of Lyndon LaRouche called "The Ugly Truth About Milton Friedman." And on top of that, he was at a conference of the International Schiller Institute, which is a LaRoucheist organization. So, like, he's pretty involved with the LaRoucheist crowd.
And with Alexander Dugin, who's like
and one interesting thing about Alexander Dugin, which I found, was like he used to be a member of the National Bolshevik Party of Russia, but he left in 1998, and then the members of the National Bolshevik denounced him as like a fascist, which is very funny to me because,
the National Bolsheviks are like a complicated movement. We can go into them later, but like
They're like, in as much as they're an actual, my understanding is that in as much as they're an actual political movement in Russia, they kind of stand for groups that are like Russian nationalists but are opposed to the current Russian state. It's kind of complicated, but yeah, it makes sense that they would like denounce someone as a fascist, especially someone like Alexander Dugin, who has a lot of ties to like, not really ties, but he has. I think it's overstated a lot, but he's a lot more mainstream acceptance. I think he got too cool for them. Is really the thing. Is like
it's weird, and there's also like this site, which like if you search for this on Twitter, there's like tons of instances of Maupin essentially just citing it as like a reliable source, him linking articles. Hey, read this. It's called globalresearch.ca, right? And this is essentially just like a site for conspiracy theories.
Every single one.
And yes, and
it's worth discussing like why Maupin believes the things he believes. Sorry.
So to conclude,
let me go into that in a bit, but it's like one thing that stands out about this site is that like one of the prominent writers on there is Paul Joseph Watson, which is like exactly the type of person that Maupin says that like people keep wrongly associating him with, but like
he's actively associating. So the question is like, who is Caleb Maupin and what does he really believe?
Yeah, it's
And it's less about the person. Like personally, who fucking cares like what he eats every day or like, no, like because he's kind
he
of a
didn't talk about that, I think. But,
yeah, but like he's a good like case study of like a certain type of like thinking brought to like absurd conclusions, but even its absurdity, it is uncomfortably close to what some people really do believe, or like even if they don't fully
yeah,
realize it.
it's yeah, we talked a bit about this pre-show, but he towards the end of his BreadTube book, he goes a little bit into his organizing history, and he used to be like involved with the WWP, which is like which is like an organization, I think by like Marcy, right? Like the former cross guide or
Yeah,
something.
Marcy is he's kind of a funny guy because he's basically Trot, who was like tanky, kind of. Well,
Yeah.
in the side,
I mean,
yeah, a tanky Trot. It was like a full Soviet defensist, and
Yeah, and the Socialist Workers' Party, like was he? I think Marty was initially part of the Socialist Workers' Party, but then split from that over uh, like differences in about like I think Mao and here like the Soviet intervention in Hungary, like and then like Maupin comes along and he becomes part of the WWP, and he eventually got into a fight with the leadership there over Libya because he was like, "Hey, like I don't understand how you could label Libya like bourgeois nationalists, but like China not. What? Why is China a proletarian state but Libya isn't? Right? And like
heartbreaking.
essentially, that's a very good point, right? But like what Maupin means to say with that is like, no, they're both
Yeah,
socialist, right?
yeah.
And so, but like in a way, he's more consistent than the Workers' World Party, and the Workers' World Party was more consistent than the Socialist Workers' Party. But their views become progressively worse the more consistent they become, right?
because
But
essentially at this point, you have this replacement of working class struggle with the replacement of working class struggle with imperial struggle, with imperial conflict. You know,
yeah, and we we probably need to get to the book a bit because like it's it's very interesting because like even um, to someone like Maupin, I think it betrays. Let me just. How do I put this nicely? I think it betrays a very, very incredibly online mindset, right? Because like
Mhm.
anyone who's like has Maupin's views, but like doesn't really engage with the online left, would think this book is ridiculous because like, okay,
He's
so whatever.
okay.
But
So let's introduce the book a little bit. So we're what 20
yeah,
minutes in.
it's
So we
called
should introduce our sort of thesis statement, which is that um, Maupin wrote a very silly book called
Brett Tube Servant Imperialism,
How
examining
Bread Tube.
the new brand of internet pseudo socialism.
yeah,
And by publishing a book, he's trying to give like more validity, more like oomph to what's basically a collection of like Twitter threads, slap fights that annoy him about various like left-wing online content creators. So
yeah,
it's a very it's if you're listening to that and you think, wow, that's a very stupid like premise for a book because no one it's like pure clout chasing, you
There's not
know.
a single site. Is there like a single citation? I don't think there. I did see a single
he,
one.
he does he does do he does cite things, but like mainly to
not a
misconstrue
fucking
them.
footnote. Not a footnote ever.
He has like bibliography, but like mainly to like misconstrue the things he cites.
And the bibliography is fucking like a fucking toddler just scribbling shit.
I just wanted to get through the quotes I've marked here. This, like the first one, I think is already
it's very petty from what I've heard.
Yeah, the first one I've marked, I think you're familiar with this one, Constance. While many lessons can be learned from this period, it must be noted that Breadtube's ideology is fundamentally more dangerous to those who seek to overturn capitalism than social democracy was during the 1920s and early 1930s.
A period when social democratic governments actually existed.
Yeah, it's incredibly.
They ran Germany.
He's like the social democrats of the 1920s and 1930s. Like, forget them. We really need to focus on thought slime, which is. I mean, it's just. When I read this, I already knew like this was going to be a bang. It would like.
Actually, if I remember, the reason you said it was going to be a banger is in the acknowledgments. There's a interesting slip up that might indicate a little bit more. You remember that one? You know what I'm talking about? Walk it through.
He mentioned Peter Coffin twice in the acknowledgement.
And it's an error. It's not like separate. It's like in the very same list. I think it is a third name, Peter Coffin, and then another time mentions Peter Coffin in the same list. So it's obviously an error.
Yeah.
But then you might think, well, that's kind of weird. Why would that happen? And I'm just gonna. You will see later on why I'm saying this, but I'm just gonna say that Peter Coffin was probably on Maupin's mind a fair bit.
So the gist of this book. Sorry. Go ahead. Peter Coffin.
Oh, that like. Well, basically, what I'm alleging here is that I think a certain bit of this book was informed by conversations Maupin and Coffin had, either on their own podcast, but probably also in private. And I wouldn't be surprised if like if Coffin gave a couple of tips for how Maupin should present this book. That's most I can say. But there's like striking ways in which like Coffin like either is recopying rhetoric he's heard from Maupin, or the two share an ideological similarity there. So it's hard to like say who started it, or if it's like informed by each other in conversations, because I did show you like they had like a podcast together like not even like a day ago.
Yeah, like Peter Coffin used to have a podcast with Angie Speaks, and I think her boyfriend, right? Yeah. And Ash Coffin, and that was the Low Society podcast. Maupin came on that one episode, and now
to talk about like, Malthusianism and eco-fascism, and calling everybody Malthusians.
That podcast broke up, and now Peter Coffin has a separate podcast with a girlfriend. I'm not sure what it's called, but Peter Coffin came on that one like yesterday, I think.
Maupin came on that one yesterday, yeah.
Maupin, yeah.
I don't know if it was live stream or is like pre-recorded, but I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure, but it's interesting. It's like they're very clearly just close friends now.
Yeah, which is why like when I read certain parts of this book, it definitely it did like remind me of like stuff I would see like Coffin post on Twitter, and in a way that's like. It's like it hit like the same rhetorical notes.
Yeah. Yeah, there's one next interesting part here that I wanted to get to, because like here he like I'll just read it out. Like, it may have been incorrect to label the Social Democrats of the 1920s, despite fascists, despite the fact that they advocated and engaged in violent repression against revolutionary forces. However, a much more explicitly fascist streak can be found in the Brechup milieu. Brechu's opposition to historical progress, and growth evokes Julius Evola's references to the demonic nature of the economy and carries with it the genocidal legacy of eugenics and Malthusianism. Brechu's fetishization of street violence and action over ideology, pushing left-minded youth toward a premature, violent confrontation, also parallels Mussolini's political trajectory as described in his autobiography. And like, I think the interesting thing about this is like, he starts off by essentially saying like, okay, the social fascism thing towards the social democrats, maybe there was out of line, right? Maybe. But like, when we look at the Brechu crowd, oh, there it's applicable, right? And he actually goes on to defend the social fascist label for the social democrats. So he doesn't really believe that initial part, but just uses it as like a rhetorical trick to paint Brechup as even more dangerous than it actually is.
And the entire thing is based on a falsification of Marx. I think that's
it is. It is insane. It is insane.
Maupin is interesting because I hate to use such like a rote term as falsifier of Marx, but it's true. He's just lying about what Marx says.
He does it all. He does it all. He does the full value of your labor Lassallean shtick.
Yeah.
He does.
He says total equality.
Yeah,
that Marx
he is.
Yeah, look,
total equality.
He believes
Yeah.
the comic book version of Marxism.
He even has like in his book, he has like literally a header for one of his chapters, like none of it, like a subheader for during a chapter is the Marxist definition of socialism. And what he says is socialism is when the means of production become public property and are forced by the state to serve society overall, not the profits of private owners.
Yeah, so he uses the term, you know, he uses like the term Marxist. It's not true, you know, and what he but I think as Maupin is like an egregious example of a general trend towards like misunderstandings on the left. Ironically, it's a trend that also exists very prominently in like BreadTube and in a lot of like popularizers. You know, because the popularizers, they tell you the simple wrong version for a whole bunch of reasons, mostly because they're people who know how to do videos better than they understand Marx.
Yeah.
And they care deeply about whatever issue is happening. And so they often are not, they're just not equipped to engage in any kind of serious discussion in a way that was helpful. But leaving that aside, you know, at the end of the day, like someone like Maupin is representative of a lot of like very simple, like basic errors that people often make. And among those, we talked about Lassalleanism, but another one is this imperialism. Is it the other side of this? There's the BreadTube serving imperialism. And for Maupin, I don't have the precise page number, but he's quite clear. Maybe one of you does. He's quite clear that
it might be in our DMs.
Yeah, he falsifies Marx. He says that that essentially Marx was moving towards essentially a national position on all these issues. That the realization that the conflict in society was between like imperialized nations, and for him it's like Ireland and Poland and whatnot, and an imperialist, you know, core, and that the liberation of the imperialist nations somehow from finance capital, perhaps, would be the precondition for the liberation of the working class. I'm not really sure how this works. Maybe one of you guys understands this logic better, but it feels like they don't lead naturally from one to another. And it's not clear to me how like the end of like why does the imperialist process not simply begin again? Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Like once you've kicked out the capitalists, why do they not just
I think that's just kind of
back?
like
it seems like it's a never-ending process.
I think he just never went that far in his thinking, right?
In his Breadtooth book, he just says imperialism is the capitalism of our time, which goes to show you, like, anyone who would fucking say that is a complete, like, it's just so bad.
I think what comes out, I think a lot of people will say
that imperialism is the primary contradiction.
Capitalism. Or no, they'll even say like imperialism is a product of capitalism, but we need to oppose imperialism first.
Yeah, first and foremost.
Yeah.
First and foremost. And often this takes a sort of an understandable logic, which is that this is the actual situation that we have to deal with on the ground.
Like for example, like, if you're like Mao and you're just like dealing with like the Japanese Empire basically rape and pillaging through your entire country, and you kind of are like, okay, I might need to like ally with like the nationalists, with like, maybe then you can say, well, right now the primary contradiction is imperialism, guys. Like, that's fully understandable.
It's also notable that during that time, Mao quite famously did not like super aid the nationalists. He was pretty standoffish about fighting the Japanese. There was a lot of like the Second World War in China. There's a lot going on there, but
there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, but
Lauren knows a bit about that because she once did a video on Imperial Japan, right?
And it was just specifically on some specific like historical events in like how the government evolved in a very specific pre-World War II period, and about certain specific atrocities committed in China. Like, and there was still, it's like a 40-minute video, and it's just on two very, very small things.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it
and
was
so
like,
yeah, go ahead.
No, it's nothing.
Oh, just that there are a lot of people want to deal with something like on the ground concretely, like I can go out and say like hands off Cuba. I can go out and say like hands off Palestine. This is something that I can actually physically do, versus, I don't know, when you start talking in what is actually, in many ways appears to be a somewhat more abstract thing, like, the independence of the workers' movement, the independence of proletarian action. This seems like something that doesn't have any, real impact today. And I don't know, I don't necessarily have like a fix for this, but you fall on one side of this issue, and I certainly fall on the side of the independence of the workers' movement, and I think people who care a lot about this imperialism stuff, or who set imperialism first, because imperialism is objectively real, they get really uptight about this, and Maupin is definitely in that, getting very uptight about getting very offended by anyone taking any position that could be slightly different than his, because he speaks for all the people of Iran and Libya who are being repressed.
I mean,
I'm sorry, I just have to laugh because, and this is just a very tiny segue, but I became aware of who Maupin was because of his appearance on that show that Peter did, and I that day, or the previous day, I can't quite remember, I had watched an online debate between their names were Vosh and Destiny, and they debated these two sort of like social media white supremacists, and one of them was Eric Stryker, And the other guy, Eric Stryker did not appear on camera, probably for the normal white supremacist reasons. But the other guy I confused with Caleb Maupin. And I talked about it on Twitter, and I said Caleb Maupin when the guy's actual name is James Alsop. But hopefully you could forgive me because they both look terrible in suits. They're both these kind of like frumpy looking like white guys who are really awkward. And I saw a picture of Maupin very quickly, and I was like, oh, he looks kind of like the guy. So I just assumed that he was the guy. Yeah. And he saw that for whatever reason. He found that on Twitter. He found that tweet. He was name searching or whatever. And he said something like, this is always what they try to do. They try to make you sound like a Nazi. And at the time, I had no idea who he was. And I realized I had made a mistake. And so I said, oh, I'm really sorry, man. That's my bad. I just confused you with the other guy, James Alsop. And he called me a liar and tried to, and he was quote tweeting me the whole time, of course, trying to say like, this is what they'll do to you. They'll try to make you sound like a Nazi. You're in bad faith. And it really was an accident. And I felt bad until later I realized that actually Caleb Maupin's super anti-Semitic, and what I did there accidentally was kind of feed him his little outrage cookies that he always needs to kind of keep going. And that's sort of the dual purpose of him always preempting everything with, now, the left will call you a Nazi if you say what I say. Because A, he needs that to be true, because he needs to kind of operate off of that kind of like a perpetually offended kind of, I don't know, like status, that sort of posture that he has. But he also needs to preempt everything with that, because occasionally he does say something that a white supremacist would say. And he needs you to really, I'm sure, guys, please really for certain be aware that I'm definitely not a Nazi, guys. I promise. It's just that I keep saying things that people would like if I was.
Yeah,
my little weird anecdote.
That's a pretty funny anecdote. I think one trend I really see come forward in Maupin's books is that he writes a book with like a central thesis, right? Like Satan at the Fountainhead and Bread Tube Serves Imperialism both have like a central thesis, and then he just kind of like
goes off topic.
Yeah, and then he just kind of like when it comes time to address like why that thesis is true, he just kind of acts like it's self-evident, right? Like he
because
he says
imperialism has like jets and planes and like armies and countries and international global organizations, and Bread Tube is like
videos.
5 people. Right? I'm not sure how many he talks about in the game, in the thing in the book, but
it can't be more than 10. It can't be more than 10.
He talks about it a lot, but like
with a pretty limited, like a pretty limited scope. Like we should always remember this is a limited,
Yeah, he says, for example, like the ties of Bread Tube to the Antifa street fighters are most likely extensive, but can't be confirmed. Okay, so like, does he have anything at all? Like, even something circumstantial to go on that? Like, no. I
provide like a better like source, and like I just like took a Nuke's picture when he was like in Antifa garb, and I just like put the quote there, and that's honestly a better.
You made a meme about it. I remember.
Yeah, it's like
that's more than he has.
If he really wanted to, if he was clever, he would be like, look at this, like, Bread Tube affiliated, like, socialist who brags about, like, going to Antifa protests, and he's waving a flag, and he's like,
look at who he's all associated with, right? Like, this is just commonly accepted within, like, but no. And here's another one, like, Bread Tube appears to be yet another counter gang, right? Like the Khmer Rouge, UNITA, Congress of Cultural Freedom, or the various counterculture religious cults, it speaks in the name of left-wing sounding ideals. In reality, it is most likely serving one section of the American ruling elite and the intelligence agencies. He just says these things. He never, like, here, I have another one. The existence of Bread Tube as an entity pushed forward by elements within the deep state to defend the
Elements
liberal
within the deep state, triple
Yes.
parentheses.
Yeah, to defend the liberal order from right-wing opposition is not really in itself a scandalous revelation. He just says these things, and he just expects us to go like, yeah, no, obviously, right? Like, yeah, you don't even need evidence for that. This is just like saying water is wet, right? Like, it's. I think it speaks to the kind of person who listens to Caleb Maupin, that he can just like say these things, and there's no evidence required whatsoever, because to the kind of person who listens to Caleb Maupin, like sourcing this is like really a strange thing to ask, because it is so self-evident to them, right? Like,
yeah, and there's that. And well, the thing is, he writes as if he's going to be on TV, and on TV you don't need to provide any sources. So basically, all you can rely on when you see someone on TV talking like in a talk show is to like look up like, oh, what they've written and like their reputation, if they have like proper education, or just like, you know, kind of fucking judging like by what they say, and if they can actually link sources or seem to like be cultivated in some way. But
yeah,
but I want to like bring up like, because like it's not just that, it's not like there's like, he doesn't mention like any sources, but what he does is pure falsification. It's like the Margaret Sanger Photoshop. And for people who don't know, okay, so there's a bit in this book where he talks about, you know, Margaret Sanger, who like I think was like with the founding members, or like someone who was like very involved in the first few years like of Planned Parenthood, and like she was involved in like eugenics, as were very many people at the time. It was like kind of generalized even in left-wing or even like socialist circles, and Maupin like uses that as a, you know, during his Malthusian talk to like smear her. You know, so she's like, okay, so when you open the book at page 147, you see a picture of Margaret Sanger surrounded by KKK people, and it's captioned, after abandoning Marxism in favor of Malthusianism, Margaret Sanger began courting support from racists such as the Ku Klux Klan. So this picture pretty damning. But the thing is, it's actually Photoshop, and the real picture is of the KKK, you know, raising their hands, you know, like I think an almost like Nazi salute towards a cross. And so you see the Photoshop, it's they put like a Sanger on the cross, you know, like over up on in front of the cross. So it's literally just it's
whatever her, you know, beliefs.
Yeah.
You know, 20th century progressive. Come on, they can't be great. Maybe they are. I don't know. But like, whatever she believes, it's
just a false image. It's a false.
You're just lying.
Yeah.
You know, and there's no point like lying about people. I know people like, some people think it's like fun to lie about people you disagree with. It's not acceptable for a book. It's not acceptable for like, I'm sorry, it's just not acceptable to like publish that and be like, this is like evidence. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And of course,
yeah, well, that's not. You don't have to be sorry. That's like, I don't know. I'm assuming a lot of this is like self-published, or it's published through.
It's self-published.
Yeah. Because can you fucking imagine if you had like a real like agency associated with like a big publishing company picking that shit up and running with it? The fucking heat they would get for publishing something like that.
Probably not very much. I mean, like publishing a book is like just like dripping off on paper in the academic world. But
yeah, but this doesn't.
I don't know. I mean, I guess it would depend. I mean, maybe not like mainstream media stuff, but like stuff like that. When you publish a book like that, it does come up. Like there was that there was controversy over that one book, Family of Secrets, that was like about the Bushes, and about whether stuff in there that was previously not published was true. Like I think somebody at some point would say something, but that's exactly, I think what Elyssa is saying is right, is that it would be weird to ask for a fact check, because of course if you believe that kind of thing, you haven't checked.
Yeah.
I mean, Thomas Piketty wrote a whole book about Marxism in the 21st century. Without reading
Marx has no data.
Capital in the 21st century without ever reading Capital. So like academic publishing is just a crapshoot. But yeah, like
but at least Piketty has many footnotes. This has nothing. The bibliography is just like it's not even like mentioning an edition of
Marx
the book.
Is also a special.
It's the
Marx is also a special case because lying about Marx is like an academic pastime.
It's an industry, yeah. And this is part of that industry, which is like I'm not really, I think what's important here is that like is just the imperialism that like, he's just like it's like the degeneration of left-wing politics into geopolitics, which is like one of the great tragedies of the Cold War, and people like Maupin try to resurrect it, and this is what I dislike is like when I see. I'm probably gonna catch heat for this, but we're already on the other side of that bridge. When you look at like the DSA sending people to Venezuela, right, or Cuba, not sure about Cuba, but like they go to Bolivia, they go to Venezuela, they pal around with the social democratic government down there. They talk about how like the DSA is trying to be like the like a
internationalist.
Well, they're trying to be like a pink tide for North America, you know.
I can see that.
I find the whole thing a little bit like, it's a little bit. Look, people say it's just the DSA, whatever, but I think everything deserves to be criticized and critiqued. Not the least of which, like, you can't just say like, well, it's the DSA, it's bad. What do you expect? You have to demand more. You know, you have to expect more, and ask them to be correct. And I think like, you know, people make fun of like people make fun of like the idea that, like the left composition of like, oh, like they should never support Venezuela because it's a capitalist government, but they should never support Venezuela because it's a capitalist government. I don't know. You can't just say something with a funny face and then it's a meme and then you don't have to address it. Like, Venezuela is a capitalist country. They're going to end up opposed to the working class. Like, obviously we shouldn't have, like, America shouldn't invade them. That's stupid. But like, why do you? But that's
what happens. See, what happens is when you say that, it's seen almost as like, oh, you're Fed posting right now. You're Fed posting. Why are you saying this? There always has to be. You cannot say that without it being like, oh, secretly you actually hold this other position, or you're running interference for American imperialism, right? You cannot hold that position. It always has to imply that you cannot just like say that. You know, you can't just say, X country is, you know, operates within capitalism, because of course it would, and it has such government, so we can't like support it if we want to be like a movement of the working class. And
yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
I was hopefully given Leon Trotsky's "Learn to Think" a suggestion to certain ultra-leftists, which is his discussion on whether or not working class movements should support the Soviet Union. This is in 1939, and he said, well, obviously, like, we should support the workers' government if they, you know, rose up in Algeria, or if they rose up in Belgium, you know, even if the Algerian revolutionaries were being backed by the Italian fascist government, or if the Belgians were being backed by the French imperialist government because the Belgians had to fight, you know, Germany, which are very cute little examples, but he's talking around the fact that he actually believes that like everyone should support the Soviet Union. So like what's being left on the table there is the fact that the Soviet Union was not actually a worker, like it was not actually a proletarian state, whatever that means. You know, it was not actually that, and neither was, you know. And frankly, neither is like Venezuela, neither is Cuba. You know, like Cuba's a country that relies on like cigar exports and tourism and rum export. You know, like it's a commodity export-based commodity, you know, society, right? Like that's just objectively true. And when the Cuban like social security net is like cut to pieces, it's going to be done by the Cuban government because they have to do neoliberalism. They have to do austerity because of like various factors in the world. And so the same thing about like I don't know, like Iran would murder you for being a communist. Like Iran, I think it's illegal to be a communist, or if it's not illegal to be a communist.
Yeah, I know. There's like I think there was like literally an ICC chapter guy that got arrested in Iran last year, right? Or he was like in prison for several years and he got out.
Yeah, which is pretty good because if you're in like the Tudeh party, they executed some guys for just sheltering Tudeh party members. Just like letting them stay at their house. Like, yeah.
Yeah, it's very annoying because like I think I mentioned this earlier. I think I'm not sure if it was like recording or not, but like in the book later on, Maupin cites like Noam Chomsky as one of the influences of him on educating him on like the evils of U.S. imperialism. And like I think that's very telling because like while obviously Caleb Maupin and Noam Chomsky have like I think we can acknowledge, as much as we all here do not like Noam Chomsky, they are very different politics, but like the nuggets of commonality in there is that like the focus on U.S. imperialism, right?
Yeah.
And I think what that enables is like where like Maupin shit, right? Like because if you focus on like specifically the bad actions of the bad big power instead of like how does imperialism function in the abstract, and here's some examples of how that functions, and like here's how we can like recognize that, here's how like, and here's how that supports capitalism, etc., etc. Instead of doing analysis like that, Chomsky focuses in his works a lot specifically on the U.S. And I can kind of see how like if you're like a young kind of, I think he was like a Trotskyite at that point, or it was pre-Trotsky, his Trotskyite phase. But like when you're like a young Trotskyite and you read Chomsky about the evils of U.S. imperialism, that you start really internalizing that as like, okay, this is like the main bad thing, right? Like, and you never really like start developing actual analysis of like the underlying structural like realities there of how it functions and why it functions that way.
And it's like, I don't know. I think it's I just associate this with like a very like early level like understanding of like, guys, the U.S. is bad.
Yeah, and like for example, for Chomsky, his justification, if I remember, is that like, well, I am from the U.S. I'm a U.S. citizen. I get to enjoy like the quote unquote freedoms that the troops like are fighting for, whatever the fuck that means, And what he says is, well, I kind of have like an immediate duty to critique my own country, as should everybody else who lives in their own country criticize their own country, which like, as like Elyssa said, like that leads to.
And it's also notable for like when he was talking, right? Like when he was writing,
the Vietnam
Chomsky's
War.
golden age was like the 80s, the 90s, like like he was like, being like a leftist or whatever is like, it was like serious,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's very telling that like that Chomsky had even an influence on like on someone like Maupin. There because if you compare them now, like they seem so different, right? And like I think Chomsky isn't even like the kind of person who's like, oh, we need to like support these anti-imperialist states against the U.S., right? He never takes it to that conclusion, right? But it's the focus alone that lets that opens that door for people.
For people who just want to turn it into a geopolitical struggle, so that you have like a good guy and a bad guy, right? And it's
Yeah,
like, I don't know, like, is Cuba the good guy or the bad guy? Well, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if they're good or bad. Like, that's not the point. The point is that like eventually you're gonna have to pick a side. Eventually you're gonna have to like say goodbye to like like Evo Morales and like the Castroism stuff. These are issues to be overcome. These are not like these are not these are not these are not like in you these groups are like they support the working class for whatever that's worth, but like ultimately they're gonna diverge. That's just inevitable, and you gotta be ahead of that, you know. And I think some people just want to be living in like the 1960s on Cuba,
yeah,
you know.
it's annoying. Wait, there was another few quotes I wanted to because to harken a bit back to his anti-Semitism. Um,
Really? Is there
like,
even more to say about this?
yeah, I think I think so because like he has like a few quotes, and I think these are interesting because like wait, let me get this here. Like ContraPoints has like a um a a video. I've watched a few of these videos for this, and here, let me just read the quote, right? Much like the anti-Semitic narrative that views Western capitalism and imperialism as inherently good, but merely corrupted by a sinister cabal, ContraPoints seem to argue that the evils of American capitalism are due to a sinister conspiracy of white nationalists, not in the system itself. If only this conspiracy can be purged, everything will be fine, right? And I mean, first of all, that's not like I've watched ContraPoints' video, videos about capitalism because I was curious if like he had actually watched it or if he got this somehow from someone else uh, involved in the particular view. I think you'll know who I'm talking about. But like I watched ContraPoints' video and like ContraPoints, her critique of capitalism is more or less just like, oh, surplus value is being stolen by the capitalists from the
Yeah.
workers, which is exactly what Maupin does,
Yes.
right? Like so you have like you have like a guy who tries to take issue with like a crowd of bread tubers, and they have like a very similar analysis of capitalism than him, so he has to kind of misconstrue them.
I can cite it.
And
I can cite it. Like, if you don't believe me, in the book he says, okay, headlines it, imperialism to capitalism are time. Then he starts saying, much of BreadTube's discussion of capitalism centers around the inequity of relations between employees and employers. This is certainly a very big aspect of Marxian analysis of capitalism. Marx described the alienating environment of the worker, the way the workers are reduced to appendages of machines who sell their labor power to the employer like any other commodity. Marx described how the worker is not paid the full value of his labor, with the surplus value being stolen from in order to become the profits of the capitalists. This is, by the way, that last part is wrong, literally. You just have to fucking read. The first chapter of the Gotha critique is literally just being like, oh, right, the full value of your labor. Yeah, let me explain to you why you're a fucking dumbass. Quite literally.
Yeah,
it takes it apart methodically.
and like he talks a bit more about ContraPoints, and I've actually watched her videos on this to check like what she actually said, and like this is how I know he's working off like someone else's information who's also not watched these videos, right? Like probably Coffin.
Yes,
And
I was about to say that we know that
Yeah.
Coffin has a beef with
Yeah.
with ContraPoints.
with a lot of these people.
Yeah, of course, the bridge burner extraordinaire.
And
Peter
this
Coffin.
is the anti-Semitism part, and like this is interesting in the context of what we all know about like how anti-Semitic he is, right? Of
Yeah.
course, of course, in the world view extolled by much of virtue, if you dare disagree that the West is a bastion of tolerance and freedom, while China, Russia, Syria, and Venezuela are evil, fascist regimes, you must be a fascist yourself. Who cares if you are anti-racist or have spent over a decade working against racism? Remember, I am not a fascist is exactly what a fascist would say, right? And
Which is something ContraPoints said on her video.
yeah, and there's like another point here. And furthermore, it is worth noting that claiming innocuous gestures and symbols as are fascist was actually a stated maneuver of white nationalists at one point. The idea was to make the left delusional, paranoid, and stupid by claiming all these benign things were fascist. It appears this maneuver has been effective. So he's talking about things like the okay sign, right?
I mean,
And
it only works if you're like a cuck. Like everyone just like immediately appropriated all of like the stuff that like the white nationalists tried to like turn into like their coded hand signals, you know, and it just became like this like morass of like internet vocabulary that means absolutely nothing, you know.
yeah, and it's more of a thing like, oh, if you already hang out with people who talk about white genocide, and if you already talk about international bankers, etc., etc., and then you use like the okay sign at a time when that was like a white nationalist symbol, then hey, you start looking at that, right? But it's not like, oh, everyone who uses the okay sign is like a fascist. And ContraPoints herself has acknowledged what I just said in this video, right? Like, and also what Maupin said. Like, ContraPoints said that fascists are use innocuous symbols, the dog whistle, in part so they can turn around and say, look, they're even going crazy for the okay sign, over the okay sign, right?
Mm-hmm.
So like he just didn't engage with any of these videos. It's just like
No, it doesn't. He doesn't reference any like
nothing.
He doesn't actually like refer to anything these people actually say. He doesn't say like, well, like if I was, you know, doing some critique of BreadTube because
you would
I
have timestamps. You'd be like, all right, this video, which timestamp, and you're gonna provide the quote. You can go check for yourself. But no, of course he can't because it would reveal that like either he has to like alter what they're saying and like literally would just like change out a couple of words. Or like,
I mean, last I checked, in-text APA citations for YouTube videos do require timestamps.
Yeah.
But I mean, are you guys trying to tell me that somebody responded to ContraPoints video but didn't address what she said?
I was under the impression that like ContraPoints doesn't say very much that's like very controversial, except for like the weird like Buck Angel trans medicalism. That's just cope. That's just
her videos aren't
doing
really
something stupid and then just like proceeding to dig yourself deeper for like a year, you know.
Yeah, her videos aren't really like at least her stuff on like capitalism and fascism. They're not really anything that like I I I mean they're not really anything that someone like Maupin would actually be able to take issue with if like he wouldn't be able to argue against like any of the things that are said because like on the capitalism part he just agrees with ContraPoints entirely, right? I think she's wrong, but like everything said in there is just like things Maupin also believes. And on the fascism part, it's just like it's kind of in part calling out him. So like he can't respond to it because like it's it's pretty much
Yeah.
applicable to him.
I mean, isn't Maupin is just like one step below, like, or one step, just one step removed from RedTube, right? Doesn't he have like he just goes on TV, right? He's like an American guy who's like, who's got some like, you know.
Yeah, it's just like I think it's similar to how like there's a lot of these types who are like who really want to distinguish themselves from like the mainstream media because they are like they don't appear on like MSNBC and
They're the real truth tellers.
they make YouTube videos, but like they when you look at like what they say, it's not really that different. And it's the same with Maupin. It's just a different medium, and ideologically, it's
the thing is, he does get to be on media. In fact, if he really wanted to, I'm pretty sure like if like one of RT's like Russia Today's show got axed and he was like, "Hey, can I get my own show?" Pretty sure they would give it to him. So
yeah,
like
I'm glad that you brought that up, Bang, because it he's like one step below BreadTube or whatever because that's a really good point. And he
yeah, because these people
the second you said that I realized something, and I realized he's just I realized he's like the only other real like quote unquote BreadTube type person who's like a TV person, which is like Sam Cedar. And then I was like, oh wait, he's just like if Sam Cedar was like Review Bra or something. And then that image is like stuck in my head.
Review Bra seems like a nice guy, right? Like,
no, he's a good guy. I don't think
insulting to Review Bra.
Yeah,
Review Bra. If you hear this,
Caleb Maupin is
seems seems good.
He's like one of those guys who like RT and like has he even been on like Al Jazeera, like something of that caliber?
He's been on Press TV. He's been on he's been on RT. Yeah.
He just hangs around like these like just totally pathetic little, like, not pathetic, but he hangs around like the C tier news agencies of like the anti-imperialist powers, and just kind of like
quote unquote
tries to
anti-imperialist.
Yeah, and he just tries to like get him. He just like when they're like, yeah, we need someone to comment on like the United States who's like anti-racist or whatever. He'll just be like, yeah, okay. So he's like, he knows like two people, and he can get on Russian television, and he's really mad that like ContraPoints or someone is more popular than him, which is like, who cares, man?
Resentment.
Yeah, it's very strange because he does actually cite one part of a video, I think, of like Child Slime. Let me see. I don't think I can find it that quickly, but it was about like degrowth, right? And yeah, I mean he just completely misconstrues what Fat Slime. I've also watched the video he actually got a quote from, which he didn't name, but like he also just completely misconstrues what Fat Slime actually said in that video, because like, wait, let me see. Here he says like, Fat Slime argues that humans have gone too far. The problem isn't that working people are increasingly impoverished due to capitalism's inherent creation of poverty amidst plenty. The problem is that the average working people have too much stuff, right? And he never Tatslam never actually said that, like,
Intellectual Titan Thought Slime.
yeah, he never actually said that poverty is not a problem, right?
Yeah,
He
because
just said like, hey, if we look at from an environmental perspective at like production and consumption and like what we do, and to be fair, Taslam kind of does. There is a fair critique to be made of what he says, right? But
Yeah,
like,
but like I don't.
it's
It's not the
it's
critique.
just like, nay, no, and it's like he just looks at it from an environmental perspective. If of like, hey, like the classic line of like, you can't have infinite growth on a finite planet, right? And like that's not really a point that's ever like addressed. It's also always just like, okay, but like you're saying that because you want poor people to be even poorer. You're saying that because you want to decrease the population number. You're saying that because you're like a Malthusian. Like it's never actually.
Which is not what Malthus believed, by the way. Malthus was Malthus was writing in like the end of feudalism. So he was trying to describe like feudal economies, you know, which were very greatly tied to productivity cycles, the land, and population. You know, like that's just that's just an objective fact.
And if I remember correctly, Malthus wasn't opposed to like population growth per se, right? He was opposed to it because like
he wasn't. I don't think he was opposed to population growth. I think he was describing the effects of population growth in feudal economies.
And he was like,
I don't think the implication that he gave was that like we should cull the population. I don't.
No,
that may have been a belief of his, but like,
I think he just like kind of like he wanted to like make sure the poor people would be on like starvation wages. So like the real like people create the wealth or something, like his like sort of like aristocratic class who consumes products would be the ones that get to enjoy the living standards brought up by the economy or something. It's weird. There's like there's a semi like I think like Malthus like wanted to defend the the landowners a lot more than the capitalists per se, or like the bourgeois, right? Because
I think
technical,
like,
by the way, growth is a way of managing bookkeeping. It's not actually the growth is like a way of doing bookkeeping. It's not a it's not really like an actual physical process that happens. So there's no reason why you can't I'm sorry, I'm pretty sure you can have infinite growth on a finite planet because of what growth is.
Yeah, but it's not like that's ever like something that's actually responded to, right? Like he could say that, but he doesn't, because it doesn't fit within like the critique that you just levied, right? Like at the infinite growth slogan. Doesn't fit into his worldview, because like that is what growth is. Growth is making new stuff to him, right? And like people who say they would kind of problematize growth, they want to make less new stuff. They want to impoverish struggling families, etc., etc. It's like, yeah, it's all engaging with like strawmans, and
funnily
I think
enough,
it's interesting. I wanted to get into like his solution for climate change for a bit, because like this is in the context of like he just was done talking about Todd Slime, and like how Todd Slime is like an evil Malthusian, the grower, and blah blah blah, and like he kind of he recognized like, okay, there's like environmental themes here, so like, okay, what's his solution? I'll read it, and it's just really something special. What is the inherent flaw regarding the logic of limited resources? The logic fails to take into account the way human beings interact with resources has been in a constant state of change. Across Africa, minerals are being extracted and sold at high value currently, when just several decades ago they were worthless. Computer chip technology has rendered them very valuable. The long-predicted peak oil scenario, in which petroleum would run out causing a global catastrophe, never panned out because methods of extracting oil from deep-sea drilling to hydraulic fracking have been invented. The current fossil fuel economy is certainly unsustainable and creating a global crisis of climate change, but the solution is moving to a more efficient and sustainable energy source, the most promising hope for which is nuclear fusion. For this reason, China and Russia have called for international cooperation for fusion research, and China has announced its intent to mine the rare isotope helium-3 from the moon. That's his solution to climate change. It's just like, okay, but we will just find more oil, right? Like we thought we had reached peak oil, but we'll find new, I promise. And in the meantime, we can like get helium-3 from the moon and develop nuclear fusion, and sure, we'll fix climate change, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's kind of like
It's nonsense. It doesn't take into account like the conception of like a it's not very imaginative, is what I'm going to say. It doesn't take into the account like the idea that like society could change. You know, I don't see climate change as a very huge problem because fixing it is not extremely complicated. Like this technology is very much there to go probably carbon negative with substantial investment, even capitalist investment. You know, there's substantial. It's the technology is there such that like it could happen in like a few years. You know, a decade, maybe a decade and a half. It's not happening because no one wants to like invest. No one wants to make the investment. But that's not like that's kind of neither here nor there. What's important is it's just a lack of understanding of the actual problem, you know.
Yeah, it's also just like I expect even like not understanding like the problem at hand here, like not understanding what we're dealing with. I understand that, right? But then when other people say things like infinite growth on a finite planet isn't possible, and your mind goes like, okay, but like what if we find more oil? Okay, but what if we go to other planets? What if we go on the moon? Right?
God.
Like
the Twitter
it's
discourse,
just
the asteroid mining discourse.
What?
It reminds me of the asteroid mining discourse on Twitter that pops up every often.
It's the kind of conversation you have to be just a complete fucking like weirdo to care about. Not a very big insult coming from me calling other people weird, but I can't say any of the words that I'd usually say. They're you'd have to be just a fucking asshole to care about that shit.
This podcast is only weird sexually.
Yeah, no, well, only the good kind of weird.
I've not said anything incriminating this podcast.
I
Yeah,
never
yeah.
say anything incriminating.
On the record.
Yeah, on the record, probably. Actually, we're talking about like what the problem is, right? In general, and I think we can bring it back to the fact that like Maupin doesn't like. It's kind of clear he's probably one of those guys that, like, if he read Capital at all, he probably was told to like skip the first few chapters.
Yeah,
and it makes sense because like you would understand that like there like climate change, not like you would understand that like there's a whole problem of like a value producing society, right? But of course he doesn't.
That actually makes a lot of sense. Wasn't it like suggested for a long time by like the Soviet like how to read Capital that you just like don't read the first couple of chapters. It'll just confuse you.
They even wanted to take out the first chapter on commodities from the actual print edition, and Althusser recommended to like skip the first 3 chapters and all that. It wasn't just the Soviets.
That explains so much about why people see Capital as this like impossible to understand like tome of unknowable knowledge, because like
it is. Well,
because how do you even approach it if you don't have like an understanding of how like if you don't understand like commodity production, how do you even approach like Marx's like writing on any level?
You don't. There you go.
It's completely identical to like any other economics textbook at that point, because all these terms are just undefined.
It's literally essential. Like I've been listening to like Paston lectures, and he's just like the first few lectures are just like him like going through like the first few chapters, right? Because it's that important. There's so much in there, and I want to like, we're talking like we spent like a long time on his like personal anti-Semitism, right? And I want to bring it back. Honestly, there's like so much I could quote from this, but I think this is going to be a good little section I can quote. So this is from a person I mentioned, Paston, Moshe Paston, R.I.P. to no G, who wrote an article called Anti-Semitism and National Socialism. And this article is sort of, it's like an analysis of like anti-Semitism through the lens of like Marxist value theory, which might sound like really weird, but it actually is a fucking banger, honestly.
This is pretty controversial for a number of reasons, mostly because like people thought he was defending anti-Semitism or Israel.
Yeah, which is fucking weird. This is a big condemnation of like anti-Semitism. Well, it's like a long article. Honestly, I would recommend people to like try to read it. It gets like give it time when you first start to read it, because I feel like the second half is where it starts to just hammer the point home. But all right, I just want to read a bit. All right, I think this will make sense. All right, so on the logical level of the analysis of the commodity, the double character allows the commodity to appear as a purely material entity rather than as the objectification of mediated social relations. Relatedly, it allows concrete labor to appear as a purely material, creative process, separable from capitalist social relations. On the logical level of capital, the double character, the labor process and valorization process, allows industrial production to appear as a purely material, creative process, separable from capital. The manifest form of the concrete is now more organic. Industrial capital can appear as a linear descendant of natural artisanal labor, as organically rooted, in opposition to the rootless, parasitic finance capital. The organization of the former appears related to that of the guild. Its social context is grasped as a superordinary organic unit. Community, Gemeinschaft, Volk, race, capital itself, or what is understood as a negative aspect of capitalism, is understood only in terms of the manifest form of its abstract dimension, finance and interest capital. In this sense, the biological interpretation, which opposes the concrete dimension of capitalism as natural and healthy to the negativity of what is taken to be capitalism, does not stand in contradiction to a glorification of industrial capital and technology. Both are the tingly side of this antinomy. This relationship is commonly misunderstood. So what this And he goes on to like basically make it so how do we explain this? That basically this focus on like basically his argument is that what passes off as like a lot of times like this quote unquote anti-capitalist ideology against like finance that's like very rooted in like against the abstract or just like the sort of like quote unquote global like domination of finance is a lot of times it's how do I put this? Ah, fuck! I lost my train of thought. But
well, this also has to do with Pistone's entire project, which is worth remembering. So like Pistone had this issue of reclaiming the so for him it was like a fight against like quote unquote traditional Marxism, which in some ways Maupin really is like kind of like a last soldier of, which is that in traditional Marxism, which is like his term for like the orthodox like Marxoid ideology that came out of the Second International and the Third International and like the Soviet Union, the big problem is that like production is like becomes more and more difficult in capitalism because of the tendency of the rate of profit to fall, but like other contradictions because at the time the tendency of the rate of profit to fall was not considered like academically valid because they just decided it wasn't real. And so this traditional Marxism is focused on the victory of the concrete of like production use value over the abstract, which exchange value, so it lends itself to this developmentalist ideology, and Pistone's entire project, and I think he went a little too far on this, was trying to reclaim the importance of transcending both values, both the exchange value and the use value, and so that comes through very strongly in this thing about anti-Semitism, because for him anti-Semitism is the appearance of this kind of like
it's like
underformed.
It's an underformed like consciousness of like the impersonal domination of capital, but it misidentifies what it is, and so it just sort of like for I think he explains it that like basically like Nazism saw like the Jews as like this like sort of abstract like cipher, right? Like the physical like manifestation of this abstract domination. That kind of like that's like his argument that like Nazism is part of that, and it's kind of why like even after like when like they're getting beaten like militarily, why do they keep like fighting and just like keeping the extermination machine like going on? It's because they weren't just like waging like some sort of like concrete war. They want to like
waging an abstract war.
Yeah,
they're waging a war against.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I think. Oh wait, I think it's Oh yeah, right. Okay, I can read it. Right. So this is from like the end of the article. All right. The extermination of European Jewry is the indication that it is far too simple to deal with Nazism as a mass movement with anti-capitalist overtones, which shed the husk in 1934, the rumor putsch, at the latest. Once it had served its purpose and state power had been seized. In the first place, ideological forms of thought are not simply conscious manipulations. In the second place, this view misunderstands the nature of Nazi anti-capitalism, the extent of which was intrinsically bound to the anti-Semitic worldview. Auschwitz indicates that connection. It is true that the somewhat too concrete and plebeian anti-capitalism of the SA was dispensed with in 1934. Not, however, the anti-Semitic thrust, the knowledge that the source of evil is the abstract, the Jew. A capitalist factory is a place where value is produced, which unfortunately has to take the forms of production of goods, of use values. The concrete is produced as the necessary carrier of the abstract. This is something you learn like chapter 1 of Capital. So the extermination camps were not a terrible version of such a factory, but rather should be seen as its grotesque, Aryan, anti-capitalist negation. Auschwitz was a factory to destroy value, that is, to destroy the personifications of the abstract. Its organization was that of a fiendish was that of a fiendish industrial process, the aim of which was to liberate the concrete from the abstract. The first step was to dehumanize, that is, to rip away the mask of humanity, of qualitative specificity, and reveal the Jews for what, quote-unquote, they really are, shadows, ciphers, numbered abstractions. The second step was to then eradicate that abstractness, to transform it into smoke, trying in the process to wrest away the last remnants of the concrete material use value. Clothes, gold, hair, soap. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's, you know... Yeah, yeah, I mean, that's a very powerful passage. But I think it really, I think it really shows how, like, why Postone is so disgusted by this specific, like, formulation of socialism, you know, which is, and I've talked about this like anti-imperialism nonsense is the same as, you know, not to be too bappin about it, it's the same ideology as fascism. It's the same replacement of the struggle for like liberation with the geopolitical conflict. You know, they can just be won, you know, in on the battlefield or at the UN or something, you know. And I think it's a deeply useless ideology, because you're just rooting for one side of two teams who both hate you, you know? There's no point, you know?
Yeah,
like, you may think...
It's kind of like electoralism, right?
Yeah, pretty much. They might let you on the... They might let you on the TV or whatever because you're like a pet, you know?
Yeah.
But like,
yeah.
Like,
I have a Joe Biden hat, so
you know.
So they'll let me on TV, and then it's very frustrating to see people kind of engage. They treat like their view of like the world we should go towards as like something that we can like put on the back burner, right? Like just like put that in the back of your mind for a second, because we need to focus on what's going on right now, which is that like the US is imperialist against China, or that Joe Biden is the only one who can stop fascism. We like just put those thoughts about like how capitalism is bad, and like how the ways in which capitalism like hurts people, and like the world we need to move towards to liberate like working people. Just put that on the back burner and just focus on the here and now, which is coincidentally exactly what the average liberal also cares about.
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason to be a Maupinite. This is why so many people go from like left wing to right wing so easily, because there's no qualitative difference between like believing that like China, if you're willing to sacrifice any principles for immediate gain that you perceive in this like geopolitical game, right? Like immediate gain, like, oh well, like China's gonna like eradicate poverty, so like we have to support China because like do you want Chinese people to live in poverty? Like it's kind of racist, bro.
In his Breadtooth book, he quite literally he defends everything. He defends Ba'athism, like he defends like North Korea. He defends Gaddafi. He defends everything on the basis of economic growth and like poverty. You know, reducing poverty. That's the criteria.
He goes really all the way.
Yeah, it's just like
it's quite extraordinary. Like I think it's very it's like there was this like wasn't there this like Trotsky? I don't know for sure what the details of it were. I'm sure you two know. Like the Trotskyite to neocon pipeline, Like I think that
There's
reminds me kind of this because like
yeah, but the
it's
the Trotskyite to neocon pipeline is well, it's basically kind of a myth because when you look at like the supposed Trotskyite, like it's like at most it was like one guy for a month that like flirted around like a Trotskyist sect, but was like a right winger within the Trotskyite sect. So yeah, there's not much of a connection there.
yeah
But there is I would say the actual connection there is from like from like a Soviet like defensist or just like well when you're a nationalist it doesn't very much matter which nations exactly that you're standing because you
yeah
can easily flip on your head like if you have like you start to have like moral qualms about whose nationalism you're standing you can always flip back to other like another arrangement and there's not
You
much
can always flip back to like, for example, the United States.
yeah. I think that does happen. I have kind of seen that happen online where like if you go like I've had like run-ins with like online Marxist Leninists, right? And like at a certain point you get like the Yuha, like the North Korea stands, right? Like the ones who really put North Korea front and center. And at a certain point, in about that crowd, there's kind of a crossover between them and like the Twitter Nazis because the difference because they also like kind of I've seen that crowd I'm talking about like also do some JQ stuff, Jewish question, and like at a certain point it just becomes like a matter of like what you said, which nation you're standing, and like other than that,
because if you don't
some
understand
of them
if like
have
if your whole like conception of socialism is when like governments do stuff and like there's like it's not like a world system and you just like you think that like what the problem is if you need to make like the good commodities not the wasteful like capitalist commodities
yeah,
then,
it's
then yeah
so malleable that it
and you
just
saw like we spent so much like he was like Maupin was like ranting about finance. You notice there's not a fucking critique of like the production process, the capitalist production process at all because he likes it. Of course he has to like it because he thinks like he and that's why like that's why I knew like the way he was talking about socialism and just like his whole like concern like it was very clear from like just the way he was talking that he was gonna be a fucking like anti-Semitic dipshit. And
yeah, I think we all kind of knew, but I was still kind of surprised that he had written an entire book just full of like gesturing towards an evil secret cabal because
but like
he didn't do that. He talked about international bankers in this book and how in the graduate book and
globally
how
oriented capitalists.
yeah, and he talked about that a bit, but it was never as like blatant as
And
like
what's funny in that
in the
book, he said he said like globalist was like rightist use, and then he uses globalist in his latest book, which just tell you
yeah
something.
it's
He thinks
self-report.
he thinks of himself as both because he's a fucking Duganist who's like they're trying to like
Yeah, he doesn't really care about the difference between left, right, or something. It's just like this kind of reminds me of like the Those Society podcast episode I saw. They kind of go into like, oh, you like there's a lot of happening there where they talk about like, oh, you talk with one person and it doesn't mean you agree with everything, right? And just because I talk to one person and it's not like a debate doesn't mean I agree with their entire ideology, right? But like, which like fair, like we disagree on some stuff, right? Just on the face it's fair. What he's talking about is like he talked to a turf once, like just completely critically. What he's also talking about is the shit he gets associated with Dugin, right? Like, and at that point, like, the people he's talking about, like, oh, you can't like just talk to them and just disagree with them about one thing. He is talking about like right-wing nationalists, because like to him it's just like, oh, we just disagree whether the secret evil cabal of Jews is communist or if it's capitalist, right? We just disagree whether capitalism like is bad or like whether it's good, but we agree that the enemy is the secret evil cabal of Jews, right? So like there's a common ground here we can work on. Like, yeah, it's
just like,
I'm really happy that Bhang has been here for this and for the Israel episode. Just kind of, I guess, happy, like a happy that we've done that kind of back to back, because not just because he helps corral us and structure our just insanity, but I've really enjoyed having you here because it occurs to me, and I mean, okay, I'm just gonna preface this by saying this is probably one of the more cringy things that I believe, but I was I was one of those people who was like, I mean, I was younger, but I was one of those people who was like, man, I bet I'd be a better like Risk or like, I don't know, like online war games like player if I read Sun Tzu's The Art of War. I bet I'd be really good at like chess, and I'm not good at chess, but I also haven't played chess in a long time. But
me neither.
Last
time I played I was in a psych ward.
And there's I'm singing your praises, Bang. Hello, yes, thank you. And I
had to run to the restroom. I missed everything.
No, you
when
didn't.
when I read The Art of War, I took a lot of it in, but there's
the Sun
like
Tzu one?
Yeah, Sun Tzu, yeah. Like half of it, right? A solid half of it is just practical stuff, right? Like when you fight, you should position your troops so that they have like the higher ground and the sun is at your back, so your opponent has to like march uphill with the sun in their eyes, and it's like, all right,
like
makes sense, sure.
Stuff. It's just basic.
Yeah, pretty basic stuff, but the kind of thing that like, damn, if you didn't know that, you'd be fucked. And there's one quick thing that he says, it's like a paragraph or two, and it's about like choosing a battlefield. And this is one of the things that I think is interesting about campism, is he says something to the effect of, if your opponent chooses the battlefield, you don't fight them because you're conceding, you're losing. You're choosing to fight them on their ground.
Yeah, that's part of operations now.
Yeah, exactly.
That,
and I think that's
a very good sense. I think
this whole campism problem, if we participate in these conversations, not just with the beliefs that Maupin has, but if we talk the way that he talks, then certain powers that, I mean, if we're just facing it, like he's probably completely okay with, we're just sort of conceding our principles and just saying like, oh yeah, we'll fight on that ground, and we're fine with that. And I'm not fine with that. I mean, that was kind of what Bing was saying earlier about like this Caleb is like this kind of this dead kind of like Marxist.
He's not a fucking Marxist. He's a Lassallean. Most of them are. Like, look, the moment you understand, like, a lot of Marxists are literally just like Lassalleans coping, it makes so much sense. We
have to talk about LaSalle at some point, because I have no idea what the fuck you're talking about.
This is why, in spite of everything, I quite like Donald Parkinson, just on a personal level, because, he may say that he may do the thing he learned from like the left comments of saying like, you're not a real Marxist, but like he just likes Kautsky and LaSalle. Like I respect that. I respect that.
Yeah, if you're gonna in that sense, I appreciate it.
If you're gonna be dedicated to being incorrect, at least be incorrect honestly. Unlike for someone like Maupin, who's just like
Maupin also likes LaSalle.
Of course, but like
I remember. Holy shit, I remember.
He said that.
Yeah,
someone asked him, like, what do you think of LaSalle? And he said, well,
I was feeding the lines to the guy who, like, because, okay, so I think it was Jack on Twitter, so like one of my mutuals, like, tagged Caleb Maupin, right? To just be like, Maupin is like, the new Marx or something. And then Maupin, like, apparently, like, name searches himself and replied, and then this guy was like in my DMs because he saw the post I was doing, like raging about like bits of his book. It's like, holy shit, what do I tell him? And I was like, ask him what he thinks about LaSalle. And of course he's like, he's very interesting. And I think he even like provided like a citation for like his a book from like a Trotskyist or something, probably around the World Workers' Party or whatever. That like was kind of like ambivalent about LaSalle, so that was actually pretty funny.
Yeah, it's like, it's interesting because like I don't know if we mentioned this already, but like there was this quote in the book, in the Bradshaw book, of like how he said that in Critique of the Gopher program, which is like, of course, the program from LaSalle, right? Like,
not from LaSalle, I think LaSalle was already dead by then because he died pretty young to like a duel.
Yeah, but like
it was from like the union of like two parties, like workers' associations. It was very heavily influenced by Lassalleanism. So his ideas.
Yeah.
So Marx got the Gotha program. The critique of the Gotha program was a critique of LaSalle and like of many of his ideas. It wasn't just so like ideas of like the full like the workers like under socialism getting the full value of their labor, or the ideas of like the free people state, or etc. etc.
Yeah, and like Maupin said that like in Critique of the Gopher program, Marx argued for total equality, which like, I mean, I think it's interesting that like he said he likes LaSalle so much, like he thinks LaSalle is interesting, right? Like,
yeah,
essentially, like,
to be fair, LaSalle is actually fucking interesting in the fact that like I think he
an important contributor to like socialism.
Well,
that's what he said.
Yeah, but it's really funny because I mean LaSalle is definitely interesting. The fact like I think he like he was kind of friendly with what's his name, Bismarck, but also at one time like challenged him to a fucking like pistol fight. It was actually like he's literally like some sort of like romantic like like German like hero or something, like really like kind of a buffoon.
I have the tweet here.
Oh
wait, like yeah, like this Jack guy says like, what are your thoughts on this LaSalle guy? And Maupin says, well, Marx had some good critiques, but he certainly made a great contribution. I recall reading about him in William Z. Foster's History of the Three Internationals. So, I mean, a great contribution. Like, what parts of LaSalle does he think are a great contribution?
For those who need to know, William Z. Foster was the longtime General Secretary of the Communist Party USA, published in 1952. So that was it was already what am I saying? It was already like full of feds, but now like
let's
CP.
Hold on. William Zebulon Foster.
Wait,
Zebulon. His middle name was Zebulon.
Wait, whoa.
Seriously? What a middle name.
That's how you know he was an American.
Yeah.
I can't wait. I can't even find it. Like, oh wait, no, he was born William Edward Foster, but then wait, what happened to his name? That's actually fucking.
I see it on Britannica.
Yeah, Britannica, yeah. William Zebulon. Holy shit!
That's great. Wikipedia censored this very important information. I'm disappointed.
Can't even rely on wikis for our citations anymore. What are we gonna do?
Yeah.
Did you guys have any like last things that you wanted to do? We've been going for a minute. We can wrap it up.
Oh my god. Let me remember. I don't think there's like that much else. Okay. There was like I guess there was like the funny bit. Oh, wait, let me pull it up. It was actually kind of funny, I think. No, wait. I'm trying to get the citation because it's. So there's for those who know like a bit about another. Well, I don't know. I would be downgrading Michael Parenti by comparing it to Maupin. I feel. I mean, would people agree that like okay, like they're kind of dipshits, but like
I don't think
like
it's
okay,
really a crime to downplay Parenti, like to downgrade him. Like maybe he deserves to be downgraded a little bit.
Yeah, so there's an infamous book by Parenti called Against Empire, where like he basically just like whines about like I don't know Reagan and the Bushes like cutting like drug enforcement budgets and just like
he defends the drug war, right?
yeah, he defends the DEA, the coastal the border guards, the coastal guard, everything, defends it, everything, because you know the drugs are bad and they hurt like proletarian solidarity or something like that. So I was very pleased when like in his book, out of fucking nowhere, you know, his Satan the Fountainhead book, where for some fucking reason, in between like talking about like GDP and Friedman and whatever, he says this. Alright? So imagine this out of fucking nowhere. So it is interesting to note that he's talking about Milton Friedman. So it is interesting to note that Friedman, who so often extolled the greatness of Hong Kong, was also a proponent of drug legalization in the United States. In his many speeches and lectures, he often argued that drugs should be legalized as part of a transformation of the United States to a genuinely free market society. It is not disputed that Friedman worked closely with the Central Intelligence Agency during the 1970s and 80s. It is also not disputed that the CIA has both engaged in facilitated heroin trafficking, as well as explored possibility of using narcotics for political purposes. Friedman's obsession with legalizing drugs, as well as his idealization of the world's central heroin distribution center, remains open to interpretation. Some may speculate that something far more sinister than the love of freedom is involved. For those who don't understand, all right, so it's the silencer meme.
Critique?
It's the silencer meme.
How are you gonna like do the critique of Milton Friedman and make him look good?
Yeah,
I swear to God,
so based.
Literally, if literally all you knew about Milton Friedman was that he loved like drugs,
you
selling drugs, legalizing it.
Yeah,
that's
like,
great, dog.
Yeah, he's like, oh, he wants to legalize drugs, and he's like a white ringer. Okay, at least like he can have like a little fun. I can work with that. I don't know, maybe not on a political level, but like maybe I don't know. It's certainly better than some fucking prude or something. But yeah, so people who don't get it, right? It's a silencer meme where you have like the Glock and then you put in the silencer, and the silencer is, some may speculate that something far more sinister than a love of freedom is involved. That's a silencer, and the gun is basically slurs for Jewish people.
Actually, Constance, it's called a suppressor.
Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't actually silence.
Sorry,
yeah, you wouldn't know this as a Canadian, but.
Oh, really?
Yeah, you guys don't have freedom over there.
Yeah. You don't have guns up there, yeah?
Yeah.
But one thing I wanted to, I would be like devastated if I didn't share this before we finished off. But like, there's one quote in the Brettube book which I think is unironically great. I love it. I think it's the best quote in the entire book, right? And it's the introduction of the streamer known as Destiny.
By the way, just to be very funny, apparently Destiny is now going on a big rant about how like DIY HRT is bad, and it is so bad that Gami is now on our side, saying that Destiny has gone too far. Yeah. I'll fucking link it.
well,
Okay.
So this is who we're dealing
Okay,
with.
here comes the introduction to Destiny, right? Like in 2011, a compulsive video game player from Nebraska quit his job as a carpet cleaner because he had figured out a method of making money entirely from playing the video game StarCraft 2. I think that's great. That's a great line.
And
I love it.
there's not lie.
I-
Look, I will say this. Maupin got it right. Look, I think I was like 11 or 12 years old, and I would watch like Destiny playing StarCraft 2 when he was like a edgy libertarian, and I can confirm that this is literally his origin story. There's not a single lie.
Yeah, I love the way he put it. Like
compulsive video game streamer.
Yeah, I mean it's great. Yeah,
this is
that's
like
my
this is like that
endorsement.
rule about, like the like 1,000 chimps at like 1,000 typewriters or whatever. Malcolm gets one right. He actually got one.
Yeah.
Damn.
I hope Coffin didn't feed him that one, because I think that one is really like, if he thought of that one, it's he should be really proud of it.
Yeah.
If only there was a way. If only there was a way to make short dunks on Destiny, like lower than 280 characters, for example. If only there was a way to get your owns out without writing an entire execrable.
And where more people could enjoy, one might say, like that tweet, have it become their favorite, than the number of people who read this book.
What I'm saying is, ever since Clara Sorrenti got based, it's been a real dearth of incredible tankies on Twitter.
Yeah, there's not much like.
Love you, Clara. You're based, by the way.
I just.
I have no idea who we're talking about. I do miss the one Twitter tanky who like wrote a Medium piece about me and about why why anarchism could never work because of me. Oh, dude, did you? But that's got to be a different day.
We gotta get Keffels out at some point, by the way.
The what? Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Anyways.
Anyway, I think that's about the show.
I think that's it.
It's 2 fucking hours. Jesus Christ.
I'll edit it. Down.
Oh yeah,
it's fine.
There's
eventually Jess will get in touch with me about the actual image that I'm going to use for the.
Anyway,
so someone can listen to this podcast while jerking off on SSRIs and be halfway coming by the time we're finished. I think that's a good time.
Why am I being bullied right now?
All right.
This is a new low for me. Anyways, I wouldn't ever jerk off to a podcast ever. I have standards.
Right. Yeah. Okay. No.
What do you mean? Are you saying I don't fucking have standards?
Long silence when you said.
This is a very good podcast, though. So maybe, like,
consider it.
It's all right. Look, might get the pre-cum flowing.
All right, let's go.
Yeah, we gotta stop. We gotta fucking. All right.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everybody.
Cut this entire section.
No, do not fucking cut it. The people must know.
All right, good night, everybody. Good night.
Good night.
You're recording.
Good night.